Today we're talking about this one, number 48, The Return. Yeah, not The Resistance, that one. Remember, it's double books from now on in the UK. This one is written by Lisa Harkrader, whose last book was book 44, The Unexpected, which was unexpectedly good, especially in terms of writing. I think all the writing aspects of it were really, really good. So Lisa Harkrader is obviously knows what she's doing. And the same can be said of this book. I think for the vast majority of it, the writing was pretty spot on. I was very much happy with the writing. At first, I wasn't. But things changed as the book went on. This book has a very Ellen Giroux feel to it in terms of its character, okay? So a lot of the better Ellen Giroux books are very character focused. So books 41, 43... and 47 were based heavily on character rather than on plot. And it's very much the same in this book. So much so that it could have passed for an Ellen Giroux book, but of course it's not Ellen Giroux, it's Lisa Harkrader. It's very, very similar to book 41. Very similar. And I think that's why it is where it is in the series. Because as I think it was Torren on the Discord pointed out, it would have been better placed where 42 was. So if this was book 42. But there were a couple of problems with that. One, it's so similar to 41 that it would have felt a bit too samey. And two, what would you do with Rachel after this book? This is the last Rachel narration. I don't see what more could be done with Rachel's character after this book. And bloody blimey, she needed this book. Rachel needed a good book. Yes, spoiler, I like this book. The previous Rachel books, 32, 37 and 42, have been, to put it politely, trash, okay? Rubbish. Did nothing for her character development. In fact, probably made her character development worse. So this book, I was hoping against hope that we'd finally get a decent Rachel book at the last attempt. And by golly gosh gee willikers, oh blimey, we darn well got it. So what happens here? Let's go into the plot. There isn't much plot, spoiler alert. First part, we're in Washington DC and the Animorphs are wandering through the White House. And I thought, it's a funny place to start it. And they're about to meet the president or what have you. And suddenly, the Yerks are coming in. And this is because they're now in open war. The whole thing with the Navy and whatever happened in the last book. Oh yeah, the Hork-Bajir. It's basically open war now. The secret's out. They're coming for the White House. They're going to take the most powerful man on the planet. So the Yerks bustle in. And the Animorphs, under Jake's leadership, who tries to keep them calm, say, right, let's sort this situation out, find somewhere to hide, battle morphs, and get into a big old scuffle. And it was a big old scuffle. But there's some very, very interesting stuff regarding Rachel here. Rachel is unusually aggressive. Unusually. She is rabid, essentially. It's basically mean Rachel in this book. And she starts attacking Hork-Bajir and the human controllers in this place. And she hits these two Hork-Bajir and starts tearing at them. And Jake barrels into her and says, stop. Not necessarily because of the Hork-Bajir, but in Rachel's rage, she had no idea that she was, the way the book puts it, it's almost like she's just been blown to pieces, just blood everywhere. But she doesn't know. But Rachel doesn't see it as that. She sees it as Jake being weak, allowing these two Hork-Bajir to not die, essentially. That's what I'm getting from this. And Rachel is pissed. And she has this moment where she thinks, I could have dealt with that. I would have dealt with it, and we'd be in a much better position. They've now gotten away. And she turns on Jake. So they go outside, and the president's trying to get away in a chopper. It's being held down by Hork-Bajir and Taxons. And Rachel comes in, wham, bash, and spiddly-do, and starts knocking them left and right until the helicopter's able to get away. But then she turns on Jake and starts fighting him because she's had enough with him, enough of him, and says, Jake, your leadership sucks. I know what to do better than you do. it's on. Because Jake says, if you want to take control of this group, you're going to have to come through me. And we get the scene that we were deprived of in book 32, where me and Rachel start squaring up to Jake, and then suddenly Eric comes in. Hello, Animorphs! Fucking Eric! Anyway, we get that scene. And then suddenly, she's lost the fight, and blood is spilling down her face, and then it was just a dream. It was just a dream. And I was like, what? The reason I was a bit peeved by this is because this first scene went on for 3 chapters, and by that point I was invested in it as if it were real. It's been a long time since I read the last stages of the series, so my memory wasn't great, so I was going in it almost as if I'd read it for the first time. And I got to that part where I was like, she wakes up, I was like, oh, but we just spent like, what, 20 pages on this. It felt like Lisa Harkrader had gone too deep into this to just suddenly pull it back and reveal it as a dream. That was my initial thought. So she wakes up, Rachel. I believe what happens next is she goes to Axe's scoop, where Marco now is, and Tobias is there, Axe is of course there, and they're getting into a bit of a discussion. And Rachel comes in and starts spouting off, essentially. Axe tells them the humans are about to learn of the invasion, and it's going to be an open war. And Rachel says, good, I like open war. And the others just look at her like, what are you talking about? You know, why are you so excited about this? It's mostly Marco who's saying this sort of stuff. Why are you... I get it, Rachel, you're a psycho, but surely you could show that you're at least a little bit worried about this. She says, no, what I want is a fair fight. I don't like it being covert. I want it over because it makes it fair. And the other animals are just looking at her like, what the fuck are you on about? So Rachel gets very defensive. Very, very defensive. Well, you look at me like I'm a bloody psycho or something. I mean, just forget all the psychotic things I've done in the past. I am not a psycho! She eventually goes off with Tobias, who basically refuses to confront her on it or answer her questions. And Rachel is very annoyed at this. And she flies off back towards home, and she's going through this state of mind where she's blaming all the other animals, pointing out their flaws. Almost, funnily enough, in the same way that David did. The way that David saw the Animorphs, Jake being the sanctimonious murderer, Cassie being the hypocritical, weak-hearted one, Marco being cowardly and what have you. But Rachel's like full on into, oh, I hate them so much. And then she flies towards this big radio tower with a flashing red light on top of it. But she can't stop flying towards it. She finds she's just going towards it like she's being dragged towards it. And she's about to hit it, and poof, it was just a dream. Yeah, dreamception. And once again, I was reading this like, okay, so that's like another 3 chapters of a dream. That I thought, okay, this is it now. We're into the reality now. This is it. And I was getting caught up in Rachel being so hateful and hating the others. Like, oh, where are we going to go with this? And suddenly, pop, it was just a dream. Once again, I was a bit peeved. But there's a reason I'm not throwing this on the floor. Because as frustrated as I was at this point in the book, I needed to read further to understand the context. It's one of those books. I needed to read on, and read on I did. Rachel wakes up, yeah, and goes to school, and Cassie's in there, okay? Which is weird, because I thought Cassie was younger and was in different classes, but that was in other books. I don't know. Whatever. That's not even worth pointing out, really, or discussing. But Rachel's in here, and she's struggling to cope with being in school. So she's leaning against the wall, sort of like that, going a bit mad. And she's seeing flashing red glows on the blackboard. The teacher says, Rachel, are you okay? Do you need to excuse yourself for a minute? She says yes. And then she goes outside and puts a note in Cassie's locker saying we need to meet at the barn. So she goes to the barn later to find Cassie. And just as she's about to get inside, Cassie comes out screaming, wah! And she's being chased by a horde of rats. big horde of rats and they're climbing on her and she's trying to throw them off, but she doesn't want to throw them too hard because they might break their ankles, so she's sort of trying to gently put them down. So Rachel comes in like a tornado, but then another group of rats come at her and swarm her. And she knows there's like a little lake or a pond nearby. So she shouts to Cassie, jump in the water. She runs for it and plop, jumps in, and after a while all these rats drown. But just before Rachel surfaces, something grabs her and pulls her down under the water and pop, she's in another place again. And I just want to, something I missed but it's in my notes. Let's zoom back to the classroom quickly where Rachel's got her head against the wall. The book says, but inside the wall I heard scratching and scrabbling, the sound of little claws, rats. My hands began to shake. I balled them into fists to stop the trembling. Maybe it wasn't so bad to be a rat if there were no people around to make you feel like a rat. Maybe it wasn't so bad if you lived in a place where everybody was a rat. And I had to take a pause and write a note after that line, just saying, I really liked that line. Let me say it again. Maybe it wasn't so bad to be a rat if there were no people around to make you feel like a rat. Maybe it wasn't so bad if you lived in a place where everybody was a rat. That line is brilliant. A brilliant line. I love it. And how I saw it when I originally saw it was the reason Rachel is having these visions and dreams and what have you is because she hates feeling like the only one that feels the way that she does. That everyone else has these restraints on them. She does as well, but she wants to break free of them. Whereas everybody else is content with the chains around them. She wants to break free of them. She thinks that she's the only one. So the reason she mentions lots of rats and everyone being rats would be a comfort is because she thinks, why can't everybody be like this? Maybe it would be better for me if I were to be around other people who want to break free of their restraints. But why don't they? That's why she's getting frustrated. Because nobody else has the same mindset as her. And yeah, what I probably just said was very wishy-washy and probably not very clear, because that happens sometimes when you're ad-libbing. But you get my point, and I just really like the subtlety of that line. Really, really good. Rachel wakes up in a cube, and it's in like a sewer dungeony sort of setting. You know, like dark purple, black walls, water dripping down, little plops of water drips around, and barely any light. You can picture it in your head. But she's in this cube, and she's sort of scrunched up in the cube, so it's big enough to hold her, but she can't move very much. So she's sitting in here, wondering what the bloody hell is going on. She can't get out. And she can't morph an insect because there's insect repellent on the base of this cube. She can't really grow bigger because she don't know if the thing will break open when she tries to morph or whether she'll just kill herself. But these two, Tattoo and Grease are their names. So these two frumpy teenagers, well, one of them is definitely frumpy. You got this sort of tall, skinny, zombie-like one, and you got the stocky, round one, okay? They come down the steps, Tattoo and Grease, they're affectionately known as. They come down to the cube, and I think it's Grease, pulls out of his pocket a rat, and puts it down there. And shock, bloody horror, it's David. David has returned. David, you remember him. This book revolves a lot around David, but not so much David as the guilt that Rachel feels towards David. We'll get into that more philosophical stuff towards the end. Let's just cover the rest of the plot, okay? There isn't much of it. It revolves around a couple of big events, and that's essentially it. David comes up to Rachel and says, I've amassed an army of rats on that lonesome island that you sent me to. Like the Pied fucking Piper, I came with my little whistle and arranged all the rats of the island. And we started the revolution and fucking bollocks like that. And the rats are all like, fucking yeah, power to the rats. And yeah, basically. And when some naturalists came to the island, David and a few of his rat buddies boarded this boat and made it back to land. And as rats, they were able to get loads of money and just compile it. And he's got like a few thousand. Well, I say a few thousand, it's like 25 grand. I can't remember the number, but that's roughly the sort of figure. And he's used that to convince people like Tattoo and Grease to work for him. Here, do my dirty work for me and I'll throw you a few quid here and there and you can go buy yourself a lollipop. Okay, yeah, cool. And so he's got them and he's saying to Rachel, I am now in charge. I may be a rat, but I've got the intelligence to do much better than my current standing in life would presume. And he's going to effectively get rid of the Yerks, get rid of humans, and just live as king. Grandiose. You can just see the moustache growing steadily and the fingers waggling in anticipation. David says to Rachel, right, the reason I've got you here is because you were the one that took me to that goddamn island rather than just killing me and putting me out of my misery. So I'm going to trap you as a rat as well. And together we will be Rat King and Queen. Rachel, of course, is a bit distraught by this. At first she's trying to, play the game of I'm not scared by you and all that sort of stuff. But when it seems to David that Rachel isn't going to comply, he reveals Cassie in another cube across the room. Air sealed, so she's running out of oxygen. Also, Tattoo and Grease have guns, so there's that threat as well. Not that they'll be able to shoot them, like scrummy teenagers. Gun goes that way, they go that way. They wouldn't be able to shoot a gun for shit, I imagine. But where the fuck was I? Rachel morphed to rat, and once Cassie is there, Rachel has this thing of what decision would Cassie make? She can't hear Cassie because it's soundproofed, but she decides, okay, I will morph the rat, and she does. And then Tattoo and Grease start putting food in, and she's, oh, well, this is all crazy. David starts laughing maniacally. This scene is very, very reminiscent of book 33. Very reminiscent, because Tobias was in like a cube and he was being tortured by Taylor. And now Rachel's in a cube being tortured by David because he's constantly taunting her, saying, the Animorphs don't like you, they don't care if you die, they only keep you around to do the dirty work. Rachel, you're the one that does the dirty work. That's the only reason they keep you around. And all this is cycling through her head, of course. So yeah, it's very, very similar to book 33. Except unlike book 33, I liked it. Sorry, Ellen Giroux. I didn't like book 33. I think this scene is much, much better. Infinitely better than what we got in book 33 with Tobias in the box. We've now got Rachel in the box and David torturing her. But what happens then is suddenly another voice starts coming in. Another voice. Turns out it's the Drode. We all remember the Drode, that weird half dinosaur thing. Wrinkly dinosaur. Wrinklesaur. And he pops up and replaces Cassie where Cassie had been, and then pops out of this box and reveals that David wasn't telling the truth, because Rachel has started to suspect, and she suddenly says, hold on a minute, you got an army of rats. Right. That plot seems somewhat flawed. So the Drode pops up and says, yeah, it's a pretty shit story, innit? And David's just like, I tried, you gave me that fucking script. How am I supposed to work with that? It turns out that the person who had rescued David from the island was Kryak, who then appears, the big eyeball. You remember the big TV mast in the previous chapter that Rachel was flying towards? Yeah, sort of reminiscent to that, funnily enough. I like the imagery. But Kryak says, yeah, we've used David to get you here, essentially, in this box, and just to... Well, it doesn't explicitly state it, but the reason I think that they got David there was to rile her up to the point where she was breakable. It wouldn't take much, but they needed that little bit of David just to set Rachel to the edge. Because Craig and Drode come to Rachel and say, do you remember that deal we had for you back in book 27? They want to free Rachel from her restraints. Those restraints that we talked about earlier, the ones she wants to break free from but nobody else does. They say, we can break you free of those restraints. All you have to do is break yourself out of them. We can't do it. Just like the Elmist, I'm not a meddler. You do it. You break yourself free. David perks up and says the reason Craig is doing this is because he wants revenge on Jake for what he did to Craig's howlers. Do I believe that? No, I don't believe that. I think it's a convenient excuse, and why it's there particularly, I'd have to think about it more, but the real reason behind this is, of course, to get Rachel to turn. Very much like a Palpatine thing, isn't it? Of course, you've probably watched the Star Wars prequels, but Craig comes across as very Palpatine here, doesn't he? Let the hate flow through you. But there's this weird line on page 225 that I just had to have a little bit of a titter at. Craig speaks. I want to help you realise your full potential, Rachel. We have watched you with interest and with growing admiration. I've watched your career with great interest. Why are you content to follow when clearly you should lead? And I thought to myself, has Craig never read book 37? Or has he got the reading comprehension of a wet sponge? This guy clearly voted for Biden. I mean, how can you look at Rachel's leadership and say, right, that's our guy, or girl in this case? Yeah, he clearly does not mean it. Clearly, but this is all a sway game for Rachel. It's just those, just like Palpatine in Star Wars, just feeding these little lines to try to convince. And it nearly works. Rachel is taken out of her box and suddenly she's turned into Super Rachel. I wish they'd have come up with a better name for it because Super Rachel, it does seem a bit cringe. But it's very much like the creature we see on the front of this book. So she's like 9 foot tall or something and she's got big claws sticking out of her hands. She's described as having shark-like teeth, which the book hasn't really taken into consideration. I think actually it's not a very good representation of what this thing should look like, but what are you going to do? Super Rachel! Fucking... Prada! I don't know. But she comes out of here and the Drode throws something to test her strength and she blocks it with ease and then just grabs the Drode and rips his head off. The Drode's still alive though, he's just sort of laughing. Because the Drode, Craig basically says, this is what you could be, Rachel. But you have to do this because it's either this or you're stuck in Ratmore forever. And then with a snap of his fingers, she's back in the box with David. And he starts attacking her and chewing on her and all this sort of stuff. So she's now in this situation of, do I stay as a rat in this box with David? Or do I become Super Rachel? Those are the choices that she has been given. Of course, they're not the only choices, but that's what Craig is trying to do here. She's then transported into this big arena. And the Craig and Drode are up there watching from above. And then they zap Visser 1 in there. And he's looking around like, what the fuck is all this about? And he's told by Craig, right, or they're both told, this is the deal, okay? You two fight it out. Rachel, if you win, the Yerks have to fuck off. Visser 1, if you win, they have to fuck off. Seems pretty simple. Fucking fight. And they go at it. And it's just this weird, quite exciting, so it's not weird in a bad way, weird morphing battle. Where Visser, it's speed morphs. So he starts morphing, Rachel reaches, grabs him, and then suddenly he's in full morph. So he's sped morph, just like in the TV show. And she's got acid all over her. Ah, fucking hell. Bloody hell. So she subconsciously morphs this big carnivorous plant monster. And then and tries to grab him, then no, there's loads of different morphs. He morphs like Killer Jelly, I think the book puts it as. And that's when she morphs something that sucks him up. And then he goes back to Andalite form, chops her head off, but then she becomes a new being. And he retreats and it's just like, fuck this. I'm clearly not going to win this battle. It was a great little scene. I loved it. Mad. Completely mad. Elmis Chronicles levels of mad. Funnily enough, publishing sequence, this one follows the Elmis Chronicles, which I think is quite apropos. I think this book follows really nicely for what... I should have read the Elmis Chronicles in the right place, but what can you do, eh? Super Rachel then comes up, grabs Visser-1, and starts strangling the life out of him. But Rachel then has this conflict, essentially, of what happens after Visser-1 disappears. I've got all this anger. That's why I'm Super Rachel. I'm angry and vicious and I'll fucking kill anything that comes my way. What happens when I pop Visser-1 in my hand? Where do I go from there? I've got to find somebody else to go and pop. And she realises that and thinks, oh shit, fuck. And it's a lot deeper than just shit and fuck and call blimey, you know, the big sweary words. And we'll get into that. But she drops Visser-1 and says, fuck it. Fuck it. Fuck it! And so Kryak says, oh, well, fuck you then. I'm sorry I'm swearing so much. It's a very good word for expressing emotions, isn't it? Rather than me saying, oh, buckets of swill. You know what I'm getting at when I say a jolly good F word. You feel the emotion, you feel the power. Rather than me saying, oh, codswallop and fiddlesticks. It doesn't quite have the same emotional impact, does it? But whatever the frick. Is that better compromise? I don't know. Medi Wazzock. I know you're watching. I'll swear at you. Aye, too fucking right I will. Schloop, she's back in the box with David, rat again, and Kryak's glow disappears. And David gloats, saying, you've had your chance. Now you'll spend eternity. A long time with me. But then she sees Tattoo and Grease cowering away in a corner. They're just about to go, but she says to them, oi, over there, Twazzock and Wazzock. Come over here, let me out, and I'll find David's money for you, and you can have it right then. And they're convinced by this. Ooh, that's a good deal. So they come up. David complains, of course. And they reach in and pull Rachel out. She's only got minutes left in Morph, by the way. And this part of me, at first, I read this and I thought, well, that's a bit of a cock-up, isn't it? Because the cube that she was in, the big glass cube, is big enough to have her just sort of sitting down in it. And she's complaining, oh, I can't demorph, the space is too small, I'm running out of time. I'm just like, Rachel, just fucking demorph, it's big enough for you. But it made sense, and I'll explain why in a bit. Not only that, but another bit of evidence to that thing that I'm going to cover later is the fact that we've never established that it is precisely 2 hours on the dot, that's when you're stuck in morph. We've never established that. And she gets stuck in mid-morph at the moment that the time stops, but she manages to will herself further. She manages to will her way out of it, come out of that rat body with her willpower. And it's very metaphorical. And it's much deeper than the surface layer that seems to come across. At first, looking at that, you say, well, that's a pretty convenient plot, well, a load of shit. And usually I would. But given the context of the book, which, again, I will cover at the end, it makes sense. She then morphs Grizzly and scares these two teenagers away, rather than killing them, which is, funnily enough, a parallel to the start of the book, where she knocks these two Hork-Bajir down, and they get away. But this time she lets them, rather than someone else jumping in to stop her. That's a nice little parallel. I'll approve of it. And there's a reason behind it as well. But David escapes, because apparently he can just somehow walk out of this cube. And then Cassie's still there. Cassie's back. So Rachel goes and gets Cassie out of that box. And Cassie says, right, we've got to leave. We've got to chase those teenagers before they tell anybody what's going on. Rachel says, just give me a few minutes. I'm going to deal with something. Cassie says, you're going to go get David. You can't take him back to that island again. And Rachel has this inner monologue of, yeah, I know that and you know that. Stop playing fucking word games and be straight with me. You know that I'm going to have to do what needs to be done. And Cassie's just sort of stepping back from that responsibility, which Rachel, of course, finds frustrating. But that's Rachel's character. So she eventually finds David. She goes through a big load of sewer things and then comes out into open daylight. And David's just sat there in his little rat morph. Just sat there. And he says, I'll give up. There's nothing I can do. So Rachel demorphs and looks at this rat, picks him up, and she feels sorry for him. Why? We'll discuss that in just a minute. But let's just finish off this plot. David wants to die. He knows that he's got nothing to go back to. Why go back to the island? Why go back to that restricted area where he can't escape from, where he needs and wants to escape from, but he knows that he can't? He does not want to go back there. He can't go back there. He would rather die. And he asks Rachel, please just let me die. It's over. And Rachel starts crying, bawling her eyes out. And she puts him aside and covers her head and hopes that he'll go away. But when she looks up again, he's still there. And that's when the book ends. Right. There is a lot to this book, right? So brace yourselves, sit down tight, let's cover the metaphors, the philosophical points. When people talk about this book, there's always the question of, did Rachel really kill David? Did she take him away and kill him? And a lot of people say, yeah, we can be pretty sure that she killed David, right? Did she kill him or did she not? Right, here's your answer. Neither. She did neither. This whole book is a dream. This entire book is a series of dreams. Dream inside a dream inside a dream. Whether the Kryak has genuinely come in and made these dreams a reality, much like there was a voice in Jake's head at the end of 41, remember? When he woke up and there was this mysterious voice telling him stuff after he had this big dream. It was obviously probably some outer power in some way messing with his head. We can be pretty certain that what Rachel has experienced throughout this book is one dream or a series of dreams. So no, David did not die. That is where the dream ended, with David looking up at Rachel in the midst of making that decision. So she did neither. David was never truly there. The box was never truly there. None of it, nothing about anything that happened in this book was truly there. Why am I saying that this was all a dream? Well, a few reasons. Let's go over some of the small reasons and we'll probably hit the big reasons in a little bit. Small reasons. These little plot conveniences and plot errors. Plot errors. If it wasn't a dream, they would be pretty glaring, wouldn't they? When Rachel was fighting Visser 1 in the arena, she morphed an alligator. What morph does Rachel have? She has a crocodile. That's a pretty big error. That's a different animal altogether. In what context would it make sense? She had that morph ages and ages ago, back in book 12, and she's never morphed it again because she got rid of that morph. Crocodiles and alligators are pretty close to each other, aren't they? So in her dream memory, that was a bit fuzzy and inaccurate. It just had that little inaccuracy and made her morph an alligator rather than a crocodile. The 2-hour time limit where she's in this box and suddenly she can't morph back to human or demorph into human in this box when we know that it's big enough to house her. It's because it's all metaphorical. There is no way out of it by that route. She needs to find another route. The 2-hour exact, it's not a metaphor, is it? It's a visual representation of her limits. That strict 2 hours. It's always said 2 hours, 2 hours. Never exactly, but in her dream, in this metaphorical picture, it is spot on 2 hours. Once you hit that limit, that's it, you're done. The fact that none of this makes sense in the real world. There's an army of rats. Then Kryek says, or the Drode says, whoever said it, oh, there isn't really an army of rats. Well, there was, the ones that chased Cassie down and then chased Rachel down. That clearly was a determined act. And then she's under the water and something grabs her, pulls her down, and then suddenly she's in a box. Very similar to the way that Book 41 transitioned from one scene to the other. Very, very similar. The speed morphing of Visser 1 in the arena, where Rachel grabs him and suddenly he's morphed, and then he's gone from one morph straight to another, which in this universe of Animorphs doesn't happen. Just all these little bits that, if it were reality, would be real sort of, okay, did Lisa did she actually read these books? But she very clearly did. Very clearly. There are a lot of callbacks in this book, and I've not mentioned so far, but there's a lot of callbacks to one of my favourite ever scenes in this book series. Back in book 22, where Jake is talking to Rachel in the hospital, and he's telling her, I don't know what you're going to do when all of this is over. And that is key. Key to this whole book. Key to why David is there at the end. Rachel, please kill me. I can't go back to that island. Rachel, in her chains, in her restraints, wanting to break free of everything. What happens when she does break free? What happens if she kills Visser 1? She's got to go do something else. So she's got two realistic options. Either carry on, and once this war is over, continue with that bloodlust like the metaphorical Super Rachel and become the bad guy. She's constantly calling herself the good guy in this book, trying to convince herself, I'm the good guy, I'm the good guy. But what happens when Visser 1 is gone and the Yeerks are gone and Rachel still has this bloodlust that's ingrained into her? She becomes the bad guy. Because again, in this book, it talks about the Animorphs are all good guys. So even if I might be a bad guy, if I'm joining with them, I will be a good guy. What happens when they fuck off? What's the other choice? Stay in your restraints and forever be chained down. Just like David, sent to that island with all this intelligence and all this going on, restricted to a barren rock. David is a metaphor. He's a metaphor in all sorts of ways in this book. When he's got Rachel in the box and David's out there, in control of her, keeping her in that box, he is a representation of Jake, and he starts to speak like Jake at certain points in this book, and it's very strange and beautifully done. The way Rachel feels restrained by this, and she's in this box under his total control. And here is the biggest bit, the most fascinating bit to me, the ending. Brilliant. It's got to be one of the best parts of the entire series. It really has to be. So all these little parallels and metaphors thrown in. And it comes down to those two choices that we've just discussed. This book is the death of Rachel. Funny how it comes after the Ellimist Chronicles, where we get that first, the prologue and the epilogue of a dead Animorph meeting the Ellimist. This book finishes, and it's basically telling us Rachel is going to die. That's what happens in this book. That is why she's holding David, and she sees herself. That's Rachel. Is she going to kill Rachel, take him out of the picture, or put this creature back on the island to be forever restrained? And she's in tears. She just wants this responsibility to leave, to go into somebody else's hands. But she knows that it's going to have to happen. It's either got to be A or B. Become the bad guy or die. Fuck. Sorry, codswallop. She finds this sympathy with David because she sees herself in David. much in the same way that Tobias saw himself in Taylor, but it's done much, much better here. Because there are a lot of similarities between David and Rachel. She feels all this guilt for how things happened to him, how it just so happened to be that way. That's the person that the war created. And he's now doomed to death or nothing, essentially. She sees exactly the same in herself. This war has broken her to the point where there's no going back, and she's crying because she knows she has to die. You are good. You book. I've talked about the context regarding the earlier dreams. The reason why I'm not so upset about those initial dream sequences now is because the entire thing was a dream. That's why I'm not so upset. There is no reality in this book. It all comes down to Rachel's mindset. Whether it really was triggered by Crayak, it's hard to say whether he was involved or whether Rachel just dreamt this and it's just her mind telling her these things. The whole book is Rachel telling herself, I'm in this position, I am going to have to die. Very big questions. And again, I love thinky books. I love thinky, tinky, winky books. That probably sounded really wrong. I love books that make me think and make me question what the book's actually trying to say. I could be wrong, and the way I will be proven wrong is if in the next book they say, oh, and Rachel just had this, David returned, he came back, and then Rachel took him away, making it clear that it wouldn't have been a dream. Now, if it turns out that that is the case, and we get clarification that this was actually real, then I will have to reassess this book. Because all this review depends on that entire latter 2/3 of this book being a dream. And I genuinely think it is. I could be proven wrong over the next few books, but if this David thing isn't mentioned again, at least not specific parts of this book, then I am certain that this is a dream. And if it is, then this book is a 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Not as good as The Resistance, close. And it's about time we got that decent Rachel book. Has it redeemed her character? I think to an extent, yes. Rachel's back, baby. Jake's leadership score, well, he wasn't in it. The bits where he was in it was definitely a dream. The rest of it, where it was, I'm 98% certain it was a dream, he wasn't in at all. So I can't, Jake's got no score. Not applicable. But yeah, that was fantastic, and about bloody time we got a decent Rachel book, and I'm so thankful for that. Next book is book 49, The Diversion. Yeah, the Diversion. That should be fun, and once again I think the stakes are going to go up again. We've had 2 10 out of 10s in a row. Have we had that yet? We're on a really good run, and I'm hoping it carries on. It's been great. I've loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it, and I hope you have too. So thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Ta-ra!